Welcome back to Special Ed on Special Ed. My name is Dana Jonson and I am your host. And today my guest is Diana Fannon. And she has a background in special education that I don't believe I've hosted yet on this podcast, and that is Director of Special Education. She also has a background as a school psychologist. And in her journey, Diana has faced significant challenges from a life-altering epilepsy diagnosis at 17 and other challenges throughout her personal life. And professionally, she's had over 22 years of experience as a bilingual school psychologist and a director of special education. Diana is passionate about using her journey to support others and is dedicated to empowering parents in navigating special education. She aims to foster understanding and positive change within the education system. And today we're going to discuss parent advocacy through the lens of a school psychologist and director of special education. So thank you, Diana, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. But before we can talk, naturally, I have to have my disclaimer. So let's play that first.
The information in this podcast is provided for general informational and entertainment purposes only and may not reflect the current law in your jurisdiction at the time you're listening. Nothing in this episode creates an attorney-client relationship, nor is it legal advice. Do not act or refrain from acting on the basis of any information included in or accessible through this episode without seeking appropriate legal or other professional advice on the particular facts and circumstances at issue from a lawyer or service provider licensed in your state, country, or other appropriate licensing jurisdiction.
So Diana, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to start with, I know you have a journey that brought you to where you are today that I'd love to hear about. And I'd also like to understand a little bit about the roles of school psychologists and director of special education. So I was hoping you could maybe start us off with a little bit of your background.
I'd love to share. So I'll start just with my diagnosis and then my journey that way. So
sure.
I had a pretty typical childhood for the most part, and then the sort of a surprise diagnosis of epilepsy at 17, although I guess it's always a surprise when people get diagnosed.
I know, but it's interesting that that's when it came about.
It was at 17.
Yeah, as opposed to I would presume it would be earlier, right? Like you have it or you don't. Was it just not noticed, or did it just onset was just 17?
Onset was just at 17. You know, I was an athlete. I was pretty healthy. Nothing really had happened up until that point, and then I had some mild tremors and a few times when I'd dropped some things, and then at 17, I was up early for winter break swim practice at 4:45 a.m. And instead of going to the pool, I got a trip to the hospital. So that was how it started. And I didn't have too many more seizures after that. Medication controlled it pretty well, but college was sort of a challenging time for me because I wanted to fit in with everybody else, and I wanted to stay up late and go to parties and do all the things that kids do in college. And epilepsy doesn't really like that. So,
yeah, no, it does not. I've heard rumors. Yeah.
Yes. It wants you in bed. It wants you keeping normal hours and eating healthy foods and not consuming alcohol and doing all the things that you're supposed to do. And so
basically I wanted to be a freshman in college as well.
Exactly. Yeah. I was inconsistent at best. I ended up taking a semester off of college because I struggled. I was going there to swim. I was on the swim team when I went to Yale. And by the end of the second year, I stopped swimming and I was just really struggling. So I took a semester off and I went home to live with my family and I started therapy. I took antidepressants. I was just really, it took a toll on me. And that made a huge difference. So it was sort of my first stage of really accepting and understanding. And then I went back and had a much better year after that. Not swimming at the time was the right thing for me. And just it got better and seizures were under better control because I didn't have that extra thing in my life with swimming. And then, it wasn't a one-step phase. It was the first phase of acceptance. Didn't happen overnight. And so there were challenges along the way. And I think that I finally was able to achieve control of my seizures, not really until I was 40 when I got the VNS device. So that's a vagal nerve stimulator. And so that is something. So that's something that I always compare it to I just lost my words. For heart patients, is it
like a heart monitor or
the thing that
pacemaker?
Yes. So I compare it to that. Thank you. I compare it to that, but for your brain. So
cool.
It has been super, super helpful for me And I still am on medication, but a lower dose. And so it's been much more helpful. And the reason I finally got to the place of getting the VNS device was I had a morning just before I turned 40, I think. So about 5.5 years ago. And I was really, really tired and I needed to go to a meeting and I thought I was okay. I thought it was just tired, but I got in the car, pulled out of my garage and I crashed the car.
Oh,
so yeah. So luckily it was just in the alley and it was just me and it was just parked cars. And it was, there'd been other things that had happened up till then, but that was the first time that had really been something serious.
That's terrifying.
And yeah, it was. And it was the thing that I needed to say, oh my God, it was, and it's scary that it has to be that, but I think everything seems so important, right? Going to work, going to a meeting. And now it seems so silly looking back.
Right. But, and as you said, it's probably the best way that could have happened.
Absolutely.
If it had to happen to jog you, then, at least it was relatively safe.
Yeah, exactly. That was exactly my thought. But along the way, this has been kind of what, I started out teaching and I knew right away teaching in a gen ed classroom wasn't the right fit for me. But I loved connecting with the students. I found right away that was kind of my sweet spot. And so that's how I got into being a school psychologist. And I absolutely loved it. I was bilingual, so I worked a lot with our English language learners and their families. And great. I loved our high school students too. So I worked a lot with the older kids. People talked about middle school. Middle school was not the right fit for me. That age.
No, it would not be for me either.
Right?
No. But for those whom it is, it is. Like,
that's right.
They can barely imagine working anywhere else, and they love it so much. Yes. That was not my jam.
I agree. And you're right. People are middle school who are middle school or middle school all the way.
Yeah, all the way. No, I was either elementary or high school. Those are my places that I really loved the students, but middle school, I can't. I had enough problems when I was there myself. So I'm not doing
here. I wonder if it's like a trauma response. Right. The people who like middle school were great in middle school, and those of us who can't, we just can't revisit it.
No, we got to move on.
So I loved it. And I found that while I was working with high school students, a lot of the things that would come up were things, kids who had diabetes and were really resistant to taking medication. They wanted to be like the other kids. And I found that I really connected with that because I understood it. I understood. I didn't have a lot of it in high school, but I had it in life. You don't have to be a high school kid to understand that you want to fit in with everybody else. Yeah. And we had quite a few kids with sickle cell, kids who had to go out and get treatments, kids who missed school. And that feeling of wanting to be like everybody else, not wanting to be different. And the truth is, it doesn't even have to be medical. It's just having a disability of any kind. And I got it. I really connected with the kids. And I think that's part of why high school I really understood high school because the kids were able to talk to me about it. They were able to share. That was kind of my road to, school psychology and how having a disability for me really became important and significant in that journey. And then, I went on to supervise school psychologists. So I have written and read a lot of reports, analyzing them for defensibility and seeing if they're solid. We see a lot of good ones. We see a lot of not so good ones.
Yeah, me too.
As an attorney, I bet you are super familiar with that, right?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the concept.
Yes.
Did you do a lot of testing when you were the school psychologist? You did a lot of the testing. Is that like all the school psychologist does, or I'm trying to.
So it is different. I have learned because I've been in 2 different districts now. and it is different. So when I was a school psychologist, we were the only ones who did the testing. Yes. So we did the testing, we wrote the reports and, the IEP meetings and all of that. But I also did a ton of counseling. So I did counseling for students who had it as part of their IEPs. And then I also ran groups for anyone and everyone. So it could have been kids who had IEPs. It could have been kids who did not have IEPs. And I ran groups like anger management, social skills. I'm trying to remember what other groups I ran, but those were just a couple of the groups that I ran. And a lot of times I'd get referrals from the dean's office. So I'd have partnerships kind of with the people who worked there and really were wanting not to suspend kids. So it was kind of an alternative to suspension in an informal way, right? It wasn't something
that's interesting.
Yeah. So we had a lot of kids. In the one school I worked in, we had...
I love that, by the way. I absolutely love that idea
Yes.
of education versus punishment.
So, yeah, and we had this one particular school, we had the African-American students were a minority. And so they were often targeted by whether it was intentionally or incidentally. We wouldn't presume to point that out, but the students were referred at a much higher rate than their percentage of the demographic would suggest they should have been. One of the deans and I worked really closely together to make sure that we weren't also suspending them or disciplining them at a higher rate. You can't always change the system, but you can work within it to correct it. And so that's, at that time I'd only been a school psychologist, I think, for 3 years maybe. And so,
it's a tall order.
So that's one of the things I think I've learned is that, and I say this now, realizing I should think about it more often, but you can't always change the system, but you can work within it to do the best that you can, right? You can implement little changes on a daily basis to make sure the people that you're supporting are protected or that they're getting support. And that's what we did.
That's great.
The problem, it is, but the problem, and not that I want to be negative, but the problem is that if you leave, it's not there anymore. Right. So that's the negative. And that's why changing the system is always the best if you can.
Right. And I see that a lot when there's overturn of staff of any kind. It can drastically change the program a child is 100%. Getting. Just like, we're not entitled to ask for specific staff to work with a child, but sometimes that is the difference between a child being successful or not. And it is frustrating. And I do get that because I think even myself as a parent, there was a time where I was like, I need my kid in this building and I need them to have this teacher. And they didn't get either and it was fine. So I know that that's a lot to manage. But particularly for children with disabilities, I have definitely seen when there are personality clashes, particularly if they have a one-on-one and that isn't working out, to not switch it or to not work within the system to make sure they get the training or that there's some kind of guidance. It is very difficult. For me, a lot of times when the director changes, so does their attorney. So that could drastically change everything for me because the relationship with the attorney might change. And so, it really does make a difference. It does.
And I think based on what you just said, I think one of the things, we have that happen, right? And I think as a director, and I hadn't gotten to that part of my role yet, but as a director, one of the things that we run into is there are staff who may not necessarily be, maybe you didn't hire them, or maybe you hired them and you're working with them, right? So you have what you have. Right. And there are things that you can do. So if a parent, I'm trying to figure out how to word this.
Being very delicate.
Right. If a parent asks you for a specific staff member and you have to say, we can only promise you a service, right? We can't promise you a person. But there are ways to do what you just said, right? There are ways to say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give training, and you can also help the parent. I'd often help parents with wording, right? One of the things you can do is request in writing this, or meaning you want certain training or you want certain supports. And then what we as a district can do is say, you know what, I think this staff member may be better suited because they have this training and this level of support. Or they can provide this level of support because they've had this training already. And in the meantime, we'll work with this staff member and make sure they get this training and they'll be better suited to work with this group of students. So we have positions in the case of the one-on-one, like you mentioned, or in an aid in our district, we have one-on-one positions and we have embedded aid positions, right? So it's all the same job description. It's all the same, classification. So when people are hired, they can do both, but sometimes it's less pressure on an aide when they're working with 2 to 3 students versus 1 student. And of course, it depends on the child's needs. So that's one way that we can kind of work around that.
Yeah, I like the way you said that too, because I remember having one of my clients way back when they were going in this 3rd grade. The student was going into 3rd grade, and there were only 2 third grade teachers at that time in the classroom. And the parent was saying, they have to have this teacher. They have to have this teacher. And I said, well, tell me what the difference is, right? What's the difference in the methodology or in the environment or what have you? We went in asking for a, stimulus-free environment and whatever else it was that we were asking for, and organization and structure and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And after the meeting, the parent said, can I just show you the 2 classrooms? And I was like, sure, no problem. So we went into the first one, which was the one that she wanted. And it was very organized. There was enough stuff up so it didn't look barren, but it wasn't, a whole bunch of stuff. And it made sense, and it was organized and whatever. You could just tell that person was very structured. And then we walked across the hall to the other room, and it looked like a 3rd grade curriculum had just thrown up in there. It was so overstimulating that I was struggling. I'm like, I need to leave. This is too much. And she said, that's what I'm talking about. Her child would have lost it in that classroom. Fortunately, the child ended up in the other classroom. I think everyone thought that would be better for everyone else. And they just had to say that they can't guarantee it. But, to your point, identifying what the child requires versus who they require and doing it in writing allows you to have something to hold the school accountable for. So if you have a child who requires a low stimulus environment and you put him in this classroom that's absolutely chaotic and there's no structure and it's a complete free-for-all, and the child doesn't do well, you can hold them accountable and say, well, we all agreed that they need this. Why are they in that classroom?
Yep. And I think that, and there's actually multiple benefits from that, because if you are saying what this child needs because you don't want him to have a certain teacher, but the truth is the reason you don't want him to have that teacher is because of what the classroom looks like and the way it's run, that's going to pay dividends in the future as well. Because if we know that a high sensory stimulus environment and overload with things on the walls or too many things going on, that can happen in any number of places, right? Because we might need to preload him or prepare him for going into, say it's a, like a choir or something like that, or dance or any kind of the specials that are less likely to be super structured. So it will help in general, but specifically, yes, it would help to say this classroom might not work for him because a teacher who's going to have that on their walls is likely to run their classroom in a different way.
Yes.
Right.
And that usually is how it works out. That's not the environment you see is usually indicative of how everything goes.
Right. So I think that's generally speaking, when we get requests about people, the reason certain people work is because of the way they do things. So another person can do things that way. We just have to figure out what those things are. And that's how I like to work with parents. I'm super transparent with parents because I'll say, I won't say yes or no, and I'll tell them that, but I'll say, tell me what it is you want and I can get back to you. I can review this and we can talk about it, because anything's reasonable until it's not, So So we talk about it all.
Yeah. I think that's good because there are, and we talked about this earlier, but I'm going to get us off track. So I wanted to finish talking about your background.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Tangents in my head already. So I was a school psychologist, and then I supervised school psychologists. And that was about 12 years, I think, 12 or 13 years of my career. And then I went to informal dispute resolution, took a break there for a year. I don't know if it was a break, interesting.
But I was right. Not exactly a break, but it was certainly interesting and certainly informed my next move. So I spent a year there working with families, and they had that option instead of filing for dispute resolution, instead of filing due process, they could opt into our IDR program, and we would try to resolve it. And I did, somewhere in well over 100 settlement agreements in a year. So that was good practice for me. And then I've been in my role as director, which was my next step, for almost 5 years. So I'm in my finish. I can't remember. I've finished 4 years. This is my 5th year. So, so almost 5 years. And that included COVID. That was my first year. I started, COVID hit. So that was fun. That was fun.
Oh my God. I can't even imagine. I can't tell you how happy I did not work in a school district when COVID hit. I don't envy anyone who had to go through that. I mean, it really was awful for the parents too, but I cannot even imagine. I can't even imagine. It was awful all around.
Yeah, it was. I was my best friend and her family were living with us with me at the time because they were remodeling their house, and so gosh. I had my best friend, her husband, and their 4 kids.
Oh my gosh!
So I got to see a little bit of the homeschooling happen. Yeah. It was fun.
I had 6 kids in the house. So we're a foster family, so we had 6 kids in the house during the pandemic, and we have an open floor plan. It was my husband, I think like March 20th, moved his office to the porch and didn't bring it back till November.
Oh my goodness.
Like, I'm just going to be outside if you need me.
Yeah, it was
brutal.
It was different.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nobody was, right? Nobody was prepared for it. Nobody could have even predicted what this would look like. But it was, I think that as a director, it was interesting because I was still learning what being a director really meant, right? Because I went from a really large district to a small district. So things looked different there. So I was still figuring that out. I was learning how to navigate labor partnerships. That's a whole different thing. I had never really, we had them. Again, I was with LA Unified previously, right? So that is the second largest district. So not that we don't have labor partnerships there, but I was never as close to them, right?
That was a whole different.
Right. So there's like a department for that.
Yeah.
Right. So being in a small district, I was learning about that and figuring the things out, and that, decisions, you can't just make decisions. And so it's been a learning curve. It was a learning curve. And that, I was hoping to have a first year where I could learn and visit and get to know people and then make changes my second year based on what I'd learned. But nope.
Trial by fire.
It's going to happen.
Well, if you think about that, I mean, from your first year, if that was COVID, it's only got to get easier, right? Like it has to. Or
you would think. Well, the problem is that what's happened since then is whether or not it's directly related to COVID, I think is debatable, but the staffing shortages have gotten significantly worse since then.
I think it's all, I mean, not to go down the COVID rabbit hole, but I do think it's everything is related to that in some way. I think that the children who returned from COVID were not the children who went into COVID. And we have a system that was really barely working for children to start with. And there's a small part of me that was like, oh, I hope public education falls apart, so we have to rebuild it. Did not happen. But it really was barely working for them to start with. And now all the students we knew, they're not the same kids anymore. And that fallout is going to last for a really long time. Plus that push to technology that we had but weren't using that is now everywhere. That all together, I think, made it so difficult for so many people. And there are different reasons why I think people left because of COVID, whether it got harder or some people didn't want to risk being in person, whatever it was, it doesn't matter. But I do think there's a lot of fallout from COVID that we'll be seeing for a long time. Yeah. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think we all sort of hoped that there would be changes in a way that was maybe positive or different, or at least just took us on a new path. And I don't know that that's happened.
I haven't seen it, but no. Other than I don't have to leave my house for IEP meetings, which has been great. I'm not going to lie to you.
I think that has been positive. I will say that's been very positive. I think, and I'd be interested to hear your take on this as well. I think that parent attendance and parents' ability to participate has been positively impacted by having meetings virtually. I think that meeting engagement, and I think that is not as good. I think that in-person meetings are still much better than virtual meetings.
I agree. I do. And I think one, for virtual IEP meetings, I find them to be a little more structured too, because not everybody can talk at the same time. So it sort of forces that component a little bit. I think it makes it easier for parents to attend. They don't have to take the day off from work. They can just take their lunch or their break and do it. I've also found it tremendously positive for mediations, because I don't know how your mediations run, but ours is, you're with a mediator for 45 minutes to an hour, and then you could have 2 hours that you're just sitting around. And when I was sitting in the Board of Education in a conference room with the parents, that was not productive for anybody.
No.
And, they were already they weren't on their home turf, right? And now they can do other things. They can go pick up the kids when they need to. They have those options. It just doesn't destroy the day for them, which isn't conducive to coming to a settlement, I
agree with that.
And I feel it's also easier to get support. So advocates and attorneys, it's easier for us to go to, not that I'm trying to go to more meetings in a day, but it's easier. There's a long time where I could only go to maximum 2 IEP meetings a day because of travel and, across the state or what have you. I just couldn't do more. And now it makes my schedule much more flexible. I can meet with a parent for 20 minutes. I can attend the meeting. I can do my follow-up and then go to the next without leaving my house, which is great. I mean, I work from home. My office is virtual. So I do everything except for hearings. I do think that when you're in any form of litigation, being in person is better, preferable. And we've also we've had here, I think, incidents of catching people on their cell phones during testimony. So yeah, I know. I wish anyone could have seen your face right there. Her head almost exploded.
Oh, my goodness.
So I think a lot of us feel that in person is really the only way to do a hearing. But everything else, I think it does make a lot more sense to do virtual. So that's been a huge plus.
Right.
I do want to get into as well, I know that you, not just as a special education director, but that you also separately coach and advocate for parents and teach them how to advocate. So tell me about that and how what you're doing works there. Because in my world, the special education directors are the one I'm sitting on the other side of the table from, right? They're not on my side. So it's interesting that you're taking that knowledge and information and background and using it to actually help parents. Although I can tell by the way you're discussing how you run your role that you are very much child-centered, and that's wonderful. I love that. So tell me more about the coaching bit.
Well, I think one of the things that I found is that it's often hard to do the work within the system, the school system, right? It's which is interesting because it's what should be supporting the child, and we should be supporting the family. And sometimes it's just a challenge. And I've been in 2 different places. It's not unique. I don't think it's unique to any school district, even the best school districts. I think some are more set up for success than others, but I think they're all a little bit of a challenge. So I started Disability Ed Pros, and I just started it a few months ago. It's just sort of a passion project of mine because I really do love working with families and supporting students. And that really is what I want to do. So I have a couple different things that I'm doing, and it's all designed to empower and educate parents and families.
So it's not like you're going into the meetings, you're teaching the parents how to be better advocates.
I could and I would, but it's not my goal. So if somebody needs me, I will go, right? I have the knowledge and I have the skills, but that's not where my passion lies. I want parents I want to provide the education, and I want to equip parents with the skills to be able to, to handle the day-to-day and to handle the requests, and to know how to ask for help, and to know how to ask for an assessment, and to know how to say, my child is struggling, I need help. And if they get a no, I want parents to be able to say, no, that's not okay. You don't get to say no to me.
Right.
And I hear so much about fighting. I don't want parents to feel like they have to fight. I want them to feel like they can say, here's a letter. This is my request. You need to honor it. And if you don't, this is what I'm going to do. Without it being a threat, without it being a big fight, I want parents to feel comfortable and confident knowing that there's always recourse.
Yes.
Because there is. And parents really do. They have the law on their side. And the problem is that I think sometimes information is hard to find. Or it's buried in legal jargon, or it's buried in ed code, or so I want to be able to help parents find it and help everything be accessible, and, package a couple easy courses for parents to take and have them feel really just comfortable and confident and know that this is when I need to call an advocate, or this is when I need to call an attorney. But up until that point, I can handle just the basics. And that's really what I want them to be able to do. Yeah.
I always say if I could educate every parent so they knew what they were doing when they walked into their meeting, that's really all I want, is for parents to know what they're doing, and as you said, some of it is counterintuitive. So I think sometimes as a layperson, you can read the statute and not really understand what it means. So having that translation, again, as you said, and also understanding when you need help, when to ask for help, when do you need an advocate or an attorney?
100%.
And they do different things, and it depends on where you are, and different advocates do different things, and different attorneys. I know some attorneys who do only litigation. I know some attorneys who, we do a lot of collaborative work in our office. That's just where people come to us at that point. And I go to a lot of IEP meetings. That's not all attorneys do that. And then there are advocates who might focus in one specific disability or one specific goal. So I think, knowing when and how to ask for help is a huge piece. But as you said, also knowing what you need to do. Do you find that you talk to parents a lot about communication and how to communicate with their district? Because I do find that to be sometimes what caused the rifts.
Yes.
More so than services.
100%. Because you start with the communication piece is what starts it all. Or it's what everything was good and then something happened communication wise. I find that the single biggest issue with communication is usually that it wasn't in writing.
Yes.
There can be mistakes in how you communicated or what you wrote, but if it wasn't in writing, then it didn't happen. So I say that all the time. If it wasn't in writing, it didn't happen. You can tell me until you are blue in the face. Yeah.
If it wasn't in writing, it did not happen.
Yeah. So I tell parents, you may prefer a phone call and that's fine, but then you have to follow up in writing. You can communicate however you want to, but then there better be an email after that. And you have to document that it happened. And I've even had to talk to some of my staff about that sometimes. Well, the parent said he wanted to talk on the phone. I don't care.
Yep.
That's lovely. Have a nice phone call. Follow up with an email, because now we're going to go into a hearing and I have no evidence of this.
Right. Take contemporaneous notes.
Right.
Take contemporaneous notes and then follow up in an email.
Right. Because I'm even if you just have your notes, that doesn't help me, right? You better have an email.
Exactly.
Because you need to have a shared documentation of that. You need to have evidence that he knows and you know.
Right.
And so it is, the writing is really the biggest thing. But more than that too, not more than that, but similarly, I think it is really important that we're on the same page, right? That parents and the school district are collaborating, that parents go in, because I think there's a lot of parents who are being told that the school district doesn't want to give them anything, that the school district wants to fight with you. And the school district on the same side, right? The school district sometimes is being told that, oh, that parent's negative, or that parent's fighting, or everyone comes in with perceptions. But I think we have to assume good intentions. Or presume good intentions, actually. And we have to start from a place of working together. We have to try really, really hard to collaborate on everything that we're doing. And so that means on the side of the school district, that means that we are sending reports in advance, even if the parent didn't ask for it, that we're sending the IEP in advance, the draft IEP in advance, not the whole IEP, but we're sending a draft IEP in advance, even if the parent didn't request it. Because if we want the parent to have meaningful participation in the IEP, then they need to see those documents. And then that means if the parent makes a request that seems crazy, then we have to consider it. And if it seems really, really weird, then we need to call the parent and say, what did you mean by this? What are you looking for? Because maybe they meant something else and they didn't communicate it in a way that made sense to us. So don't always assume that there's something, untoward going on, or there's some, some scheme or some, right?
And I hear what you're saying. And I think I do hear a lot from parents sometimes, they did all of this on purpose and they're targeting me. And I'm not saying that has not happened, because I have seen that happen.
I'm sure it has.
Doesn't happen as frequently as sometimes parents think. And I find that it's usually not the team working with the child that is the problem. And I also find if the parent is frustrated and they just attack and go after, there's a difference between saying my child isn't reading and you didn't teach my child to read.
Right.
You're going to get a different response from those different phrases. And I think, looking at the perspectives, it's hard to have a different perspective when you're the parent,
100%.
And I, as a parent, am not an attorney. And I, as a parent, sometimes don't make a lot of sense.
Right.
Might
And I
not even
told
be
you, I said the
reasonable.
same thing, right? I'm a parent and I'm kind of giving people a heads up. I haven't gotten to the IEP phase, but it's coming soon. And it will likely be the same.
Right.
And I don't get angry, but I cry. So I'm expecting someone's going to see tears from me. And they're going to be like, who is this lady and what happened to her? It's not the same, which is why written communication is so helpful.
Right.
Because
It can be dangerous, though, because it can also be dangerous because things can be lost, like tone, like if you're sarcastic or you think you're saying something nice and it comes across. But I do agree with you that written communication makes sense because it gives the other person time to review it, think about it. If they don't like it, calm down.
Right.
You know, we got a call from one of my children's teachers the other day and they were heightened. They were so angry and aggressive. And I'm, not going to comment on whose fault that was. But, to get that call, you kind of want to be like, okay, why don't you take a breath?
Right.
And get back to me, because no parent wants to hear from a teacher who's really angry at their child. It's not going to go well.
No.
Do you talk with parents about how to put things in writing and what things?
Yeah. And I have, some sample templates and things like that for requesting, whether it's parent concern letter or a parent sort of, I think, vision statement is what people are calling it these days. But just, kind of what you see for your child. But the parent concerns, I think, are typically the most important prior to an IEP or just in general. I think it's really important that that's documented. And if it's attached to the IEP, I think it's really important that you have, because if it's long, oftentimes it's long. Oftentimes you have concerns in multiple areas and you can attach it as a separate document. But I think it's important that you can let them know before the IEP if you're ready for that, or you can do it after the IEP, right? But I think it's really important that you let them know, or you let them know what you're going to be, like, you may already know what you're going to be disagreeing with, right? Even if the IEP is not drafted, you may know, right?
Right.
But that way you kind of front load. These are my areas of concern.
And then also, do you find that it's helpful to review how to review the IEP with parents? Because I think if someone comes to me and they said, I've asked for this at every single meeting for the last 10 years, and I look at it and I say, it's not anywhere, that raises the question of, okay, this poor parent had no idea what they were looking at when they looked at this document. So how do you
their
go
disagreement isn't there.
Yeah, their disagreement isn't there.
Right. And that is, again, similar to your parent concerns, your IEP disagreement. So yes. Right. So I absolutely. Parents need to, that's where you understanding the IEP comes into play, right? Understanding the sections of the IEP and where you want to look and what parents really need to know. Because I have seen people going through, the goals and the details and the special factors page and all of this. And listen, I think some of it's important, right? I think you do need to know. And I think parents need to understand at a sort of macro level all the details of the IEP. I think it's absolutely important. And you need to understand the goals in particular, because you should be getting progress reports, right? You should be seeing progress reports on that. But do I think you need to understand every single page of the IEP with a level of detail that like a case manager or an IEP teacher would? Sorry, IEP teacher, special ed teacher would. Apparently I'm having trouble with words today. But I actually don't. I think you need to understand enough as a parent to be able to read it and not feel like it's in a totally different language.
Yeah.
But I do think, based like what you just mentioned, understanding the goal, because you get progress reports, and understanding IEP notes and the places where the parent's input should be so that you can check where your input should have been.
Yes. And present levels of performance, I think, because depending on your format, sometimes that can be hard. We just got a new format in Connecticut, which is actually frustrating and difficult because we all just got used to the last form.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
But it does have the levels of performance with the goal that it belongs to. So I think that makes it easier.
We have that in some of our districts in California, not where I am, but some of our districts in California have that.
It just made it easier to not skip over, and that way I think it is good. I mean, there are a lot of positive changes to the new form. It's just, as with any new change like that, there's lots of tweaks that have to be made.
Yeah. And I go through all of that with parents. But I think what you really want, and I think present levels, because they're based on the assessment, And because you go from assessment to present levels, to goals, to services, to accommodations and placement and all of that, right?
Right.
That's how it all kind of feeds together. But there are a million pages in the IEP that aren't what I just rattled off, right?
Right.
So figuring out what's important. But I think, but what you said, it's really, really critical that parents know, if I give input, where does it go? Where will I find my voice in this IEP? And biggest, parent input statement or parent concerns. And that goes in different places in every IEP. If there is a place on every IEP for parent concerns, it's just different on every state. And so you have to find the place in the IEP where they put that. But you can always ask for your statement or document to be uploaded to the IEP.
Yep.
So you're not limited to whatever space they have. So
I was just going to say, sometimes
that.
the space is like 3 sentences, like parent agreed with everything or parent disagreed with everything. And that's it. That's
or
all
parents shared concerns. And like that.
Yes, that's a good one. They shared their concerns, but we're not going to tell you what they are.
Right. It can also be in the notes page. So you have a couple of options to where that could be. And then when you disagree with the IEP, you don't have to check the boxes. You can also upload a document there. And so there are a couple of different ways. So I do go through that with parents. And I tend to walk them through their options and let them choose. I don't want parents to do something that I tell them to do. I walk them through the benefits of all the different ways you can do it. And because I sometimes do having a document attached to an IEP, sometimes there's a risk to that.
Yeah.
It should be included every time a records request is made, and it should be reviewed by everybody, but you never know. We're all human. School districts are human people with busy schedules, and I would like to say that they'll review everything, but I can't make 100% guarantee. So if it's part of the IEP, there is a much better chance. Now, with a disagreement, I don't worry about that, because if you disagree with an IEP and that's on the signature page, then they're going to see it. But with parent concerns, there's some different ways to share that. So I walk them through all the sort of pros and cons of each option. Yeah.
That's great. No, I agree with you. And I think, like, for example, we don't have to sign the IEP, right? Just in general. So I wouldn't say every district, but some districts will say different things to parents. So the message that comes across is different.
Right.
But I think, as you said, understanding where your concerns go, understanding where your disagreements go, and understanding what your child is receiving. Those are really the most important things, and how you're going to be updated, which is the progress reports, and paying attention to them, not just the letter, but, what are they actually doing? Well, this has been really, really helpful. Are there any other thoughts that you have that you want to share with parents? I think we've covered so much of advocacy. I think it's great.
I know, this has been super fun. No, I think the biggest thing is just making sure that parents are not afraid to use their voice. As the parent, you are in charge of your child's education. And I know for some parents, I've seen it, and parents have told me that it can be scary sometimes to go in, right? You're one parent, and oftentimes, like in an IEP meeting, there's 10 or 12 people who are school staff members, and some parents don't feel comfortable. And my best recommendation is to find one person at least that you feel comfortable with in the school. Usually there's at least one staff member who's kind of a willing ear, and find that person and talk to them, or at least kind of stick with them. But you are your child's voice until they have their own, or if they have their own. And so just, find someone to support you if you need it. But
I always say no one's going to advocate for your child better than you are. No one's going to step in and just take it over for you. So you have to learn. And the more you do understand it, the less intimidating I think it becomes.
Yes.
Because as a rule, you are going to be in a minority at the table.
That's always true.
You just are, just based on the numbers. Yeah. And one thing we talked about before we started was having somebody else with you. Yep. Having another set of ears or another set of eyes doesn't mean you have to go hire an advocate for every IEP meeting. If you can, I would recommend it, because just having somebody else to help you keep things organized, know what you're doing, know what you need to do, and making sure it happens correctly is priceless. But even if not, as you were saying something about, just you have a friend who can come and be another set of eyes and ears and say to you afterwards, like, that didn't make sense. I don't know what you're, in agreement with, or, either advocating with you or asking questions that you don't think to ask, having another set, because we aren't as parents, I think it is impossible to be objective.
100%. Yes.
I don't think it's a thing.
No. No, there's no objectivity when it comes to your kid. And honestly, sometimes I found, and my friends tell me this, sometimes I am in the other way. Like sometimes I'm not negative, but I'm like I think he can't do as much as he can. So, and I think it's because of my background, right? Like, I'm like, well, he's not great at that. She's like, what are you talking about? He can do this, this, and this. And so it comes in both ways depending on your view, but you don't have an active.
You're looking at the negative because that's what gets the support, right? So your brain goes straight to the negative. And that's just I think that's just an occupational hazard.
100%. And so, but either way, you're emotional and you're not objective. So I would agree with that. You definitely should not IEP alone, as we were discussing. Phone a friend.
Absolutely. Exactly. Phone a friend, phone an advocate. And so when somebody's listening to this and they say, well, I have to talk to Diana Fannon because she's just who I have to talk to. She gets it. I have to talk to her. How do they reach you? How do they find you?
My website is disabilityedpros.com, and I have a free webinar coming up. So you can go to disabilityedpros.com/webinar, and that's on demystifying the path to eligibility. So we'll talk about assessments and we'll talk about the eligibility process, and that's coming up at the end of January. I have a couple dates. And then you can also find me on Instagram at disabilityedpros.
Excellent. And all of that information will be in my show notes. So if you're driving right now or going for a run, just go back and look at the show notes and I will have that information there. Diana, thank you so much. I know this will be very helpful for parents. And I love getting this from a SPED director as well. I think it helps affirm, I think, what parents need to do when both sides are saying the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Excellent.
And it's been great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Please don't forget to follow this podcast so you don't miss any new episodes, and leave a review when you have a chance. If there's anything you want to hear about or comment on, please go to my Facebook page, Special Ed on Special Ed, and find me there. I'll see you next time here on Special Ed on Special Ed. Have a fabulous day. The views expressed in this episode are those of the speakers at the time of the recording and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company, or even that individual today.